Welcome to GCCars. My name is Eric and this is the all-new 2023 Nissan Z. This new Z is powered by its 3-liter twin-turbo V6, putting out 400 horsepower and 350 pound-feet of torque power on the rear wheels through a 6-speed manual. Those are some very good internals and basics for a sports car, and if we look at it, honestly I think they nailed it. I never really warmed up to the 350Z and 370Z styling, but this one channels the historic designs from the Zs so well. I think it is just absolutely gorgeous. The square kind of front grille is a little bit of a topic for debate, admittedly, but I think in person it actually works really well. I didn't like it on like photos, but in person I think it works well. And the color, by the way, is called Gun Metallic. I would probably go for the yellow because you know me, I always like yellow colors, especially if it's a little flashy. But no, this looks really, really good. And of course we have the Z logo in the back. It's just so good looking. And speaking of good looking, yeah, the back might be like the single best piece of design we've looked at this year. I always do the GCCars awards, you know, so the 2022 GCCars awards, we always have a design category. This has pretty good chances of taking that one home. But let's take a quick look at the interior and then we're gonna hit the road. How about that? Of course, frameless doors, right? Nice coupe. Okay, let's talk Nissan Z interior. And this is actually quite interesting because it's a bit of a weird mix out of like new stuff and old historical kind of like throwbacks. Because first of all, of course, we have our usual Nissan infotainment, which as always, I'm not the biggest fan of, but you have wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, so you're all set. Then we have this new gauge cluster, which is honestly very pretty, very high res. I like it a lot, very customizable. That's awesome. But then at the same time, our climate controls are simple, just dials, and there's no readout for them at all. There's no digital readout for the temperature, nothing like that. I don't think I've ever had this in any press car since I've been active. And I mean, that's definitely a design choice because Nissan has readouts in others. So that's quite interesting. And then we have, of course, buttons on the steering wheel and all that. It is very interesting. It's comfy though. I like it. So first of all, the materials are really nice. All the touch points with the suede style leather, very soft. The seats are very nice, very soft, although the passenger seat could use a little bit more lumbar, maybe. I have it adjustable right here. Oh, the seats are weird too, by the way, because they're mixed electronic and manual. So if you want to raise the seat up or change the angle of the cushion, that's manual. You have like dials and knobs on the side here. But if you want to move it forward or backwards or adjust your seat back, that's all electronic. So that's definitely quite interesting. And then of course our 6-speed manual handbrake. Big props to you, Nissan, for that. And then we have these gauges here, and I love those gauges. First of all, they look fantastic, and then we have a turbo speed readout going up to 25,000 RPM. So no, this is quirky, but in a good way. For the most part, usability is really nice. As per usual with Nissan, it's a bit of a mix with new and old, and some of it is on purpose here, some of it is not, like these heated seat switches, which are always kind of 90s-ish. Anyhow, but before we get driving, why don't we take a very quick look at the practicality and the liftgate of this Nissan Z. As you can see, the Z has a liftgate and you have enough space to kidnap at least one person, maybe 1.5. It's just not quite as elegant to get out. 7 cubic feet of space in there. It's not very deep though, so you're a little limited, and because everything that would be longer, you'd need to sort kind of like into the cabin. Yeah, it's a 2-seater sports car. It's not going to be that practical, but you have a few cubbies behind your seats just to give you that extra bit of space. And other than that, let's go have some fun. Let's go drive. Okay, now then the Z. Is it as good as we had hoped for? Well, let's find out, shall we? And it is quite powerful. It is quite fast. And there's a lot of good here. And unfortunately also a lot of bad. So this Z is a bit of a mixed bag, I'm afraid. Let's start off with the good things. We have a twin turbo 3.0 liter V6 producing 400 horsepower and 350 pound-feet of torque, and it pulls. Like, it pulls. And I'm very certain that Nissan has underrated this drivetrain, because it pulls way harder than it should for 400 horsepower. It is quite rapid, actually. And obviously, it's matched in this car here to a 6-speed manual. It doesn't really get much better than that. Front engine, 6-speed manual, rear-wheel drive. Beautiful combination. So first of all, we got to appreciate the fact that Nissan made a new Z in 2023 for us to enjoy. But this is also where some of the issues already start showing a little bit. So first of all, the drivetrain, the engine itself, I really like. A nice pull. It really is worthy to rev it out and get all that power. It feels nice. The 6-speed, very notchy shifter, very good. Problem is the throttle mapping and the throttle input. So the throttle input is slightly delayed. So whenever I go on the throttle, it takes a while for it to go up. Well, so for the engine to react, not just like in terms of horsepower, it's not turbo lag, it's actual throttle input delay, because when I'm on the throttle and want to go off the throttle, it also stays on the throttle for a little longer than I keep my foot on the actual pedal, which is quite annoying. It means that every time you accelerate, you brake, you try to go to the limit, you start from a stop, or you want to rev match, you have to like mentally adjust to that delay, meaning I have to rev match less with the or at different times than I would actually need to do if there was no delay. Now this isn't like too big of an issue. You get used to that. If you own the car, you'll adjust to it just fine, I'm sure. But for me, who for example just has a weekend in this, it is very noticeable that I just can't properly rev match that, because I'm just not quite used to this delay yet. The EcoBoost, the Camaro, the CT5 V-Black we've had recently, no problem whatsoever. Like I said, that's a bit of a minor issue though. Then the throttle mapping, I don't like the throttle mapping. If you want to start off from a stop, the first very initial travel of the throttle pedal is just way too sensitive. Like, it sounds like you just learned how to drive stick and you just give it way too much throttle because it's so sensitive. Once again, you kind of get used to that, but this is only where it starts a little bit. Luckily, that's kind of the end for the drivetrain. Otherwise, the drivetrain is pretty good, and I think they nailed it. That's kind of the sweet spot. Yep. This is kind of where this engine really shines. And you know what? Why don't we do a little bit of a launch just to tell you and see how quick it actually is. So let's do traction control off. We're going to do manual, of course. We're not going to do launch control or anything. We're just going to do it ourselves. Get to stop, rev it up. Okay, what you noticed is we lacked a lot of grip in that. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that in a second. But what you noticed also is it's just a joy. I love 6 manuals. I love the driving itself, and the drivetrain is really good in the Z. It is just very natural. And we also don't have drive modes. We don't have drive modes in here. We just have a big button for traction control off. You press it once, traction control's off. Pure driving. They really focused on that. Which is a shame, because once you go to the actual driving characteristics of this Z, it falls apart a little. Like, you push it to like 6, 7, maybe 8/10, it actually feels really good. The steering is fairly responsive and controllable. You really know where you're kind of planting the car and placing the car, and you can do like quick corrections, and steering works well. Problem is, your steering is absolutely dead. You don't really know what any of your tires are doing, which makes it a little hard to kind of find the edge. Wouldn't be too big of an issue if you would actually have decent tires on here, but these Bridgestone Potenzas are garbage. I'm sorry to say it like that. I hate to be so negative, but they are genuinely just terrible. Normally tires, P0s, Eagle F1s, PS4Ss, they gradually fall off, some more than others. So you want to have a very gradual fall off in terms of grip, right? So you feel the slip coming, and you can just fine tune it to just the right amount of slip you want to turn around a corner. These Potenzas they just go. Suddenly you don't have grip, and add to that you don't feel where that level really is. Very minorly can start feeling the rear tires kind of get lighter, and the suspension being, quite frankly, undersprung, and this thing snaps. This thing wants to snap on you, and it's the Canadian fall. Yes, we have summer performance tires, but it's not been that cold all the time. Even on warmer days like today, it is still quite quite quickly. You wouldn't necessarily think that the car tries to swap ends that rapidly and that instantly as it does, and that makes it a little sketchy to push, especially once you get like beyond 1/10 is where this car really, like, it feels good, and then it bites you, which is a bit of a shame because there's, I think, a lot of potential in this. The suspension is actually fairly comfortable on the highway, but it is undersprung. It does not cope well with weight transfer. It does not cope well with imperfections on the road. The car never saddles. And to put down 400 horsepower to the rear wheels, especially if you have mediocre at best tires, you do want to have a suspension that can actually cope with those demands and keep the car stable. The Blackwing, a 668 horsepower manual and rear wheel drive car in worse weather than we had this week, should not be more controllable than the Z is. What if you lose traction in the Blackwing, which admittedly happened a lot, but if you lose traction, it stays stable. This just, like I said, it just snaps. It wants to swap ends too much for my liking. You know me, I like a car that dances a little. I like a car that is, you know, a bit of a handful, but this is in an almost unpredictable way. At least on the road, you cannot even get close to pushing it. You never want to go 10/10 or anything close to that on the road. But like, even other cars are just much more dynamically capable and communicative, which is the main issue. This is not as communicative as it should be. So it's not the sports car. Definitely not the sports car that we wanted. Or some at least wanted, or some expected. But does that make it a bad car? No. The Z is not a bad car by any means. This is actually still quite enjoyable. This is very high level criticism. This is very high level criticism that comes from a place from where we've had Camaro SS1 LEs, we've had Blackwings, we've had Mustang GTs, which quite frankly aren't perfect either. But we've just had some world-class sports cars this year and in recent years. So of course there's a high bar to get to. But once we kind of shift our expectations from sports car to GT, this Z actually becomes quite enjoyable because it has the power, it is comfortable, you have driving assists, like adaptive cruise control and everything, even with a manual, which make this car actually quite nice to drive cross country. It's not the most practical, but you don't buy a two-seater sports car to do that. And if that's your expectation, if you're not looking for the best sports car out there, if you don't look for the most engagement, but you want to have a car that is fun to push to 7/10, 8/10, like, you know, on that way that when you initially start to have to concentrate a little bit and you can be plenty of quick, yeah, this Z is great for that. It's just not the sports car that some might have expected. But I think with that, it's time for us to send it over to the final thoughts. Okay, final thoughts on the 2023 Nissan Z. And yes, unfortunately, it is not quite the sports car me and many others have envisioned it to be. Despite having all the basic components that it needs to be a compelling sports car, it falls apart in the details. Luckily, the most grave of the issues, speaking of the tires and the suspension, is something that is fixable. First of all, if you buy the Z, you can fix it yourself for a bit of money, but preferably Nissan would go and fix it for the next year or the year beyond that. It is not too hard to address those, unlike the steering and the engine delay, which is probably going to be a little bit harder for them to fix, but those are the priorities. Make this thing just drive better, be a little more engaging, and a little bit more progressive in terms of its limit handling. But if you don't look at a car to be driven at 10/10, to be driven at 9/10, if you just want to have a car that's fast, stylish, and comfortable, a GT, the Nissan Z suddenly starts to make a lot of sense because it fulfills all those three categories and needs very well. It is absolutely handsome, it is very comfy, and like I said, it's actually kind of stupid how quick it is. And if that's what you're looking for, sure, go ahead. Personally, at a price of $60,583 Canadian, I would just never look at the Z because I want something a little bit more sporty, and for less than $500 more, I can get a Camaro SS1 LE, which is somehow more practical, but just a better sports car all across the board. But anyhow, That concludes my review. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe, because the more subscribers I have, the more cars I can show you on a weekly basis. And other than that, yeah, thanks for watching. Remember to love yourself even when times are hard, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Thank you and goodbye.